Uncommon Sense with Junia Doan, sharing the wisdom and insight of those who have been there and done that.
An Uncommon Sense special presentation. Junia Doan interviews 3 guest speakers prior to their presentations at Matrix Midland Festival's 25th anniversary at the Midland Center for the Arts, June 2003. Special thanks to Matrix Midland Festival for their support of this project, and congratulations on their 25th anniversary season.
Welcome everybody to another edition of Uncommon Sense. Today we celebrate another episode in the life of the Matrix Midland Festival's 25th anniversary season. Hence their wonderful display here, hence their wonderful program, which you've all perhaps received in the mail, and if not, you should, and sign up for next year. And with me tonight is a speaker who is, in the next 25 minutes, going to be on the Matrix stage. Michael Beschloss, good or bad?
It's
not good enough.
C minus, Beschloss.
Beschloss. I've had trouble with that, but you know, Junia's not that easy either. So I'd like to welcome him, and I'd like to ask something along this line. This is a show about wisdom. This is a show about how we really handle the ups and downs in life. You've written a lot about people, principally presidents, but who have had hard times in their lives, crises as you call them. But we all have crises in our life at some time. What do you tell yourself when a hard time hits?
In terms of what I've learned from history?
Well, I'd like, and your life experience.
Maybe one thing is, life is 99 rounds, as a number of presidents have actually said. I think that may come from Joe Louis, I'm not sure about that. But one advantage of being an historian is that you always try to take the longer view. You know, for instance, if I'm writing about someone, they are probably at least 30 years out of the White House, if not a lot more. My next book is on Lincoln. And so when you look at people in terms of their whole life, I guess you can't help but sort of relate that to your own life and say that, you know, someone like Lincoln had a lot of hardships and a lot of loss, but you have to look at the life in total, and he really grew from them. And he grew from them from, I mean, just as examples of the things that he suffered from. He lost his mother at a very young age, his only sibling, a sister. If you believe the Anne Rutledge story, he lost this great love of his life, and historians have been very skeptical of that story in recent years, but more recently they've come to feel that that may well have actually happened, that there was an Anne, well, we always knew there was an Anne Rutledge, but that this was someone that Lincoln was very involved in, lost her, had a very difficult marriage, lost 2 boys, another boy died after he died, and then of course had to suffer through the Civil War. So if you look at that on paper, you would say that this is someone who should have been almost immobilized by loss and depression and couldn't have really functioned. Yet, you know, from each of these things he suffered hugely, but he also grew, and this turned out to be a great man, although not necessarily a happy man.
So when something hard hits you, you really say that the story isn't over, right?
You have to look at it in context, and I guess, you know, one way I look at it is maybe, is this something that I'm going to be bothered by 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Because in a way, that's the way an historian operates, because, you know, for instance, we might watch cable news and hear these very big discussions about the news of the day, and did the president have a good week or a good hour? And, you know, historians will look at it through the other end of the telescope. They'll say that a lot of these things that seem like a big furor at the moment in history don't loom too large. And what historians do is that they try to set these things in context and decide what in someone's life was important and what wasn't. And I guess you can't help but, I don't do it consciously, I think, but you can't help but apply that to your own life.
Now, well, I was reading a little biography of Cleopatra the last day, and her times were so turbulent that to think about our times, actually they're quite quiet, comparatively speaking. But in any case, you're a man I know from your matrix schedule here who makes the very best use of time.
I try it.
And what works for you in doing that? I mean, because we all know the planes sometimes mess up.
You mean in general in life?
Yes, what
or-
is your philosophy of time usage?
Well, I've got 2 boys and a wife,
nice.
and that's what's most important. For instance, one deal I've made with them is that I don't leave Washington, where we live, more than one night a week, unless there's something that's just overwhelming. So we can be together. I think they're probably glad to get rid of me one night a week at this
Right.
point, or they're sort of used to it. So I think everything revolves around that. And the other thing is, just professionally, I write books, and what I try to do is write in the morning and try to sort of preserve that time, especially before noontime, because the telephone begins to ring, and even if I get distracted and have to do other things later in the day, and I will pick up my children and take them off to baseball or something, which I love doing, but
That's
it's not
admirable.
necessarily great for writing books and getting them done on time. At least then you can feel that you've gotten in 4 good hours, so that you don't have to feel that.
Is that what you
whatever
do,
else you
4 hours?
Well, oftentimes I do get through the whole day, but I try to get at least 4 hours that is sort of sacrosanct, and not go on the telephone and not do other things. And otherwise, I think it'd be very hard to get these books written on time.
At the times when writing is not easy, I mean, you have the material and you just don't want to organize it the way you want, or I don't know, whatever. What do you tell yourself then? Do you just put it aside? Do you have a technique that works your way through that kind of period?
I mean, in this, I sometimes think about fiction writers, and I don't know how they can do it, because for an historian, at least for myself, I should just speak for myself,
Right.
it's not easy, but there is a structure to it.
Right.
Because if I'm writing, for instance, my next book is on the end of Lincoln's life and the assassination of what followed, and I'm doing it chronologically, so that structure is there,
Right.
and either I've got the documents or I don't, and understand it or I don't. So by the time I sit down to write, it flows pretty easily, because I'm going sort of down an outline and following a plot that was set out by history. So it isn't easy, but I don't go through the writer's blocks. I think probably that a fiction writer does,
creative,
because the novelist has to not only do what I'm doing,
conceptualize.
exactly, but also think of character and plot, and invent everything out of whole cloth.
How would you handle rejection? I mean, it seems to me when you start writing, your books come out, or even in the early days, or even not so early days, I mean, we all face rejection at some time.
Sure. Well, I think it's probably harder earlier in your life, because you're beginning to sort of think of your own, abilities professionally. In my own case, I was hugely lucky, because I wanted to do this since I was 10 years old, and my first book was originally my senior thesis in college, and so it was published the year I got out of graduate school, and that was when I was when I was 24. So I mean, this is I wake up every morning and I know how lucky I am to be
Yes,
able to
indeed.
do exactly what I wanted to do, really from the very beginning. So in a big way, I've had sort of a blessed time in a way that other people don't. But I sort of think of some other careers, especially someone who is an actor or a painter, and how difficult it is to do that. The odds are so heavily stacked against you, and I think it'd be absolutely awful.
When you're not writing and you're recreating, when you're talking with people, your wife, or how important is the sense of community? If it's sharing the day or sharing the concepts, I'm sure you have people who are very much in the field, but beyond
Sure.
that,
You mean in terms of what I'm writing about, or just more
writing,
generally?
interesting questions that are occurring to you,
Yeah.
difficulties of
It's
the
very
flow.
important, and I think not so much in terms of chatting about what I write about that day, because in a way, and this is probably different from other careers, I think if you tend to talk it out, you sort of, you're leaving it in your conversation, not putting it in your written work. So I tend to actually not to talk about it very much when I'm writing, because I want to sort of focus the energy on what's on the page rather than, chatting about it with other people, unless I've got a question or,
Talk to me more about that. Does it bleed off the energy? What is that energy?
Well, I think what it is, it's sort of like, I'll give you an example, and I
Yes.
hope, has some meaning. I was once on a TV show about 1996 that PBS was doing, which was called Character Above All. And the idea was that they got about 9 historians whom they were going to bring to the governor's palace at Williamsburg and tape, I think, about 90 minutes with the idea that would be a special on PBS. We'd talk about the character of presidents. Jim Lehrer was the moderator,
Right.
as indeed it all did happen.
Right.
Problem was, this was on a cold winter night. I think it was in January. There was a huge snowstorm. And so the result was that a few of the historians did not make it in time for the taping, which, as I remember, was something like about 6 o'clock. And so the result was that they wanted to wait until everyone was there. So everyone went downstairs into sort of a cold room in the basement. In the governor's palace, you're not allowed to bring food, but you are allowed to bring things to drink. And some people drank. I did not because I'm so pure, but I didn't think I'd be able to perform too well if I did it on the program. And we waited for the other historians, and finally, I think one historian still had not shown up, and they decided to do the taping anyway because there wasn't much power left in the generator. And the program, I think even Jim would agree, was a little flat, and the reason it was flat was that this wonderful conversation that we all would have had on camera, we basically had in the cold room downstairs while we were waiting to go on. And once you do it one time, it's hard to really reproduce that. So I guess my point is that when I'm writing, I'd rather have the excitement of what I'm, or at least what I hope is the excitement of what I'm writing about and discovering, be on the page rather than, lost in a conversation somewhere.
I often find that my artist friends will say something similar. They don't dare discuss their project because it will weaken their execution of it. So it's...
Yeah, I think that's right. And, people have different approaches, and I guess it's just my own.
Yeah. Well, I want to be very respectful of our guest's time because he has to head over shortly to give a talk at Matrix.
So that the viewers will know whether I was late or not. They'll be looking back in history.
But he's not talking about what he's talking about later at...
didn't fall into a bar or anything?
No. I wondered if I could just ask one last question. I often think that writers are often opening doors and closing doors. And so when you're closing or wanting to open the next door, whatever it is, what is your thought pattern about how do you come to where you're next going to choose to be?
You mean subject matter?
Subject matter, what might be interesting about the subject matter that pulls you in that way?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you write different books at different times in your life. For instance, this book I'm writing about Lincoln comes from really when I was 7 years old and went to the Lincoln sites. I grew up in Illinois, and my parents took me down to Springfield and New Salem. And I knew that I would write about this at some time, and I just didn't feel quite ready yet until really the mid-1990s. And I think one reason for that was that, I'm now 47. I felt that when I was younger, I was probably too callow to understand Lincoln as well as I hoped I would. I probably still am, but maybe less so than I was. And the other thing is that, I was saying, maybe I don't like to sort of share chatting about the precise subject I'm talking about, but one thing I always hoped was that if I had children, that if I wrote on Lincoln, I could, take them to Civil War battlefields and so on. And my little boys are now 9 and 6 and just at the age where that really means something to them. So that's what I hope we'll end up doing the next few years, places like Antietam, that's near Washington, and Bull Run, which is really a treasure.
That sort of confirms my suspicion that people make decisions based on multi-level values or
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, as I started to say, we want to thank him for being with us tonight. He has shared some important viewpoints with us, and one is to take courage from the lives of others. In his case, his work with presidents, that they have endured tremendous changes and obstacles in their life. But if you take the long view, which you do as a historian, looking back, the smaller things kind of drop out. It's also really important to know that perhaps you're more subject to rejection feelings and experiences when you're just starting out in life, and to take heart because and I'm maybe putting words in his mouth here, that they hurt less. Maybe they hurt less, I don't know. Anyway, maybe you have more of them and just get used to them. The other thing is that it's nice to have the gift of knowing what you're going to do early in life, because it kind of centers your viewpoint on that one way or another. You kind of know the direction. And the same way when you start a new project, It's useful not to talk about it in too much detail because it gets less focused, and you want to put that energy and that intensity and that follow-through in the endeavor rather than discussion of it. And then finally, when you think about your next step in life, to remember that many things drive you in that, and to be as fully conscious, if I can call it that, as you can about what are your values and what kind of, what several outcomes can you satisfy by your next choice and your next series of actions. So again, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time, and remember, kindness counts. Thank you.
Sure does.
And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just great.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's lovely.